All right, well, thank you all so much for joining us for Armchair Travel to Greece with the Traveling Librarian. We're joined again by Jeff Klapes, the Traveling Librarian, for his newest Armchair Travel presentation. This series highlights travel photography and stories and travel tips about destinations around the world. And I'm going to apologize in advance for my mispronunciations, but this month we're traveling to Thrace. How am I saying that, Jeff? Thrace?
Well, in English, that's correct. Yep.
Okay, so let's leave it in English. Okay.
Yep.
So nestled in northeastern Greece, Thrace boasts stunning landscapes from lush mountains to serene coastlines. Its rich history is reflected in ancient ruins, charming villages, and vibrant cultural traditions. Visitors can explore the breathtaking Rhodope Mountains, indulge in local cuisine, and experience the warm hospitality of its diverse communities. And so Jeff here is the recently retired head of reference services at the Beebe Memorial Library in Wakefield. You just stole our children's librarian from us, Jeff. And he's an avid, as we know, he's an avid traveler and photographer. I want to again thank the Friends of the Tewksbury Library and Corning Life Sciences Foundation for sponsoring. So all nearly 100 of us who are watching live and the 400 plus of us who registered, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Jeff for joining us this afternoon. And Jeff, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Robert. I didn't know we stole your children's librarian from you.
You did. Yeah, she's now your youth. Well, I don't want to get into this here, but yeah, she's now okay. Your head of youth services.
Oh, okay. It happens. Anyway, thank you everybody for having me back. It's good to see everyone. It's nice to see a good-sized crowd. And thank you for coming to yet another program on Greece. I do actually travel to places other than Greece, and I'm always amazed at how many people are willing to continue to come to these programs over and over again about Greece, because it is my favorite country, of course. But let me share my screen and then we will get started. If I can, there we go. Hopefully that should look okay. I also need to mention that this is kind of a special program for me because I have a number of friends in Thrace, Thraki, as it is known in Greek, some of whom are planning to attend this program. So there's no pressure on my part to get things right. I think if I do make any mistakes, I'm sure they will chime in and let me know. But I will start right in. And okay, here we go. As you know, anytime if you've come to any of my programs before, I like to do these very informally. So feel free to pop in throughout the program in the chat or the Q&A modules to ask questions along the way. If there's anything that I can answer while I'm doing the program, I will. And if not, I'll catch up with everything at the end. So first, let's put things on the map so you get an idea of what area we're talking about. Thrace, or as it's called in Greek, Thraki, is the area, you should be able to see my pointer. It's the area way up here in the northern part of Greece, the northeastern part. It was originally named, the name comes from the daughter of one of the Greek titans from Greek mythology, Okeanos and Parthenope. So Thraki was his daughter, and also her sister is Europa. So it's a small world in the mythological community. But to give you an idea of what the region is historically, it was a region that actually originally encompassed much beyond what it does today. It went into what is now modern Bulgaria, much of southern Bulgaria, and also this whole area over here in the east, which is now part of modern Turkey, as well as the part that is in Greece today. The yellow area that you can see in this map roughly corresponds to the Roman province of Thrace back when this was the Roman Empire. Now the area that we'll be talking about today, this orange bit, this is a modern map of Greece over on the right. Greece is divided into 13 administrative regions, like US states, sort of. And Thrace is actually part of the orange bit is actually Eastern Macedonia and Thrace. And we're going to look at both of those. So technically, a couple of the things that we are looking at visiting today are actually part of Eastern Macedonia, but it's all more or less part of the same ancient region, which you can see closer up here. The capital of the area is the small town of Komotini over here, which we will visit, along with Kavala. The Greece's second city, Thessaloniki, is way over here in central Macedonia. We're also going to visit Drama and Xanthi as well. We won't end up getting all the way over to Alexandroupoli, although it's worth noting that city because there is an important military base there because it's so close to the Turkish border. There are, in fact, more than a few U.S. troops stationed there. The population of the entire region is about that of the city of Boston, give or take. And it also includes two important islands, Thasos, which is just off the coast here, where I have been, and Samothraki, where I have not been yet. Samothraki, you've probably heard of. It's very famous because that's where the well-known winged victory sculpture, which is now in the Louvre in Paris, was found. The landscape of this area is very beautiful. It's nestled between the beautiful Rhodope Mountains in the back, and along the coast it comes down to flat plains, which are very agricultural, and some beautiful long sandy beaches of the northern Aegean Sea. It's not a terribly visited part of Greece, which is a shame because it is such a beautiful area and it does have a lot of interesting historical sites and some fascinating cities that we'll visit. And also a lot of little villages and quite a diverse culture. The picture you can see here is actually spring poppies growing along the side of the highway. The area between the mountains and the sea, which are pretty flat, have long been very important agriculturally, and they still are, mainly for tobacco, vineyards, some grains, as you can see here. And if you happen to be lucky enough to be there at the right time of year, sunflowers, which you can see in these pictures. We're going to start in the city of Kavala, which, as I said, is technically not in Thrace. It's in eastern Macedonia, and it's about an hour and a half east of Thessaloniki, which is the major northern city. It's the second largest city in Greece after Athens, and well worth a program in its own right. Kavala is probably the biggest tourist hub and also port in the area. It has a beautiful old town. And it is very old. It was founded in the 7th century BC and has been very important for ages since it was on a very important road east towards Constantinople, modern Istanbul. Like most of Greece throughout history, it was part of the part of the Ottoman Empire for a long period of time, so that the whole region retains a lot of the cultural influence of the Ottomans, especially in the architecture and also in the food. There's a lot of vibrant street life in Kavala, as elsewhere in Greece. This is me, actually, probably in another 10 or 20 years, hanging out in the neighborhood. I love the old town of Kavala in particular because it has some wonderful buildings on narrow streets, many of which are pedestrianized. And it's on kind of a bluff that juts out over the sea. I really liked this particular intersection because of the primary colors, the red and yellow and blue all in one shot. Probably the most noticeable monument in Kavala is the Roman aqueduct, which was built in the 1st centuries AD when Rome was in charge of this area. And then about 1,000 years later, it was rebuilt by the Ottomans and still forms a major monument in the middle of the city. You'll see a lot of typical Ottoman style buildings as you walk around, many of which have, this one's actually not Ottoman, it's much later. This has a sort of Art Nouveau look to it. But a lot of Ottoman style buildings, including the ones you can see in the back, have upper story balconies that come out, often held up by angled beams. And those were designed to, first of all, give extra space on upper story floors, and also to invite a little bit more of the cool air because this area can get quite hot in the summer, as elsewhere in the Mediterranean. Here's some other good examples of that, with the balconies sticking out over the street. There's some great colors in Kavala as well. It's a terrific place if you're into photography, as I am. At the summit of the old town of the city is a statue of Mehmet Ali, who was a general and really was essentially the founder of the modern Egyptian dynasty, for the modern country that Egypt is today, in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Behind him, you can see the dome of the Church of the Virgin. And very close by is Ali's 18th century house, which is a very typical Ottoman style building, which is now a museum. And some other neighborhood pictures in the old town. There's also a wonderful mosque. This is called the Halil Bey Mosque, with its very serene interior. It almost looks like a watercolor, the very faded pale blue. One of the best things about Kavala is the view, because it's built on this peninsula that's built high up, sticking out where the old town used to be. And now you can see the sprawl inland along the coast, where the more modern city has developed. It was a fortified city, so it's complete with fortification walls and a castle, which you can visit today. This is kind of looking from the castle down over the old town to the tip of the peninsula looking south. You can just make out the dome of that church that I showed you a moment ago. And here's a view of the fortress, which is still in pretty good condition, including a lot of the walls that you can walk around for the views. And here again is another view looking inland, where you can clearly see the old aqueduct towering over the downtown area. It's about 75 feet high, and although it is no longer used for bringing water into the city, it's still probably the single most impressive site when you enter Kavala. There are lots of crazy little roads that give the city its charm. I loved this road sign that shows you how to get up to the castle by doing this convoluted turn, typical of old Greek cities. One of my favorite buildings in Kavala is this imaret, which is a Turkish word for, back in the Ottoman Empire, this would have been an inn, essentially a hotel for travelers. And when I was there, which was a few years ago, actually, this was under renovations, and it has been since turned into a beautiful luxury hotel. So if you have the money, you can stay there. The rooms, unfortunately, started around $800 a night for the cheapest rooms, but it's really nice, and it has amazing views out over the Aegean. Not very far from Kavala, a little bit inland, and leaving that city, we can stop at the ancient city of Philippi, which is named for Philip II of Macedon, back when all of this was part of the Macedonian Empire. And Philippi was founded in the 4th century BC. It's barely a few miles inland from Kavala, so it makes a very easy side trip. This is the theater, which is one of the oldest structures that remains in the site. It's a beautiful site underneath some hills, and is fairly well preserved. It has a very nice little museum. It was a wealthy city through Roman times, and of course, St. Paul stopped by there in the 1st century AD, where he wrote his letter to the Philippians, which I'm sure you've heard of. I was lucky enough to be there in the spring during poppy season, so it was a very pretty site at the time. And it was very prosperous for many centuries, partly due to its connection with Paul. Much of the ruins that you see today are actually later than the original Greek period. They're from Roman times. And there are in fact, some Christian basilicas that were built there. It was also a very important city on the Roman road called the Via Egnatia, which runs more or less parallel to the coast all the way to Constantinople or Byzantium, depending on what time period you're talking about. But it was the main east-west road along the coast up here in this part of the world. However, a few centuries later, in the early 7th century AD, the city was unfortunately almost completely destroyed by a major earthquake, and it never really recovered after that. Starting in the 19th century, some French archaeologists began excavating, and now it's one of the most important archaeological sites in Greece. And as I said earlier, Thrace doesn't get anywhere near as many tourists as some other areas of Greece. The big tourist areas are, of course, the Athens and the area around it, and the islands, particularly the southern islands and Crete. Thrace is kind of in the middle in terms of tourist visits, but particularly if you travel north to Thessaloniki, it's well worth spending at least a couple of days heading east, because it's very easy on the highway to go and visit some of these beautiful ruins not very far, an easy day trip from Thessaloniki. As a librarian, of course, I had to note that they even have some leftover ruins of the site of the public library in the city. And because of the connection to Paul, it's important that they actually found this small portion of an early mosaic, which refers to Pavlo. You kind of see that here, referring to St. Paul, who would have been there in the mid 1st century AD. It is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So it gets a lot of attention. And as I mentioned, there is a small museum there as well that has some excellent finds from the area. This is another view of the spring poppies by the side of the road. A little bit inland from maybe 10 miles or so further inland from Philippi is the small city of Drama. It has nothing to do with ancient plays, which you might think of given the name. The word actually comes from an ancient Greek word relating to water, and that's because the city has a number of springs. It does indeed have a lot of water, including this lake right in the center. This is called Aya Varvara Park in the center. The building in the background, you'll see some more things like this a little bit later. This is an old tobacco warehouse. Much of this region was known and is still to some degree for its tobacco production. And the city had its share of water mills as well. Some of the old tobacco buildings have been reincarnated as offices, housing, museums, and so forth. The park is quite nice. There are some tavernas and fountains, and some local waterfowl, which are always fun to see. And I guess related to the waterfowl, I found this payphone kind of unusual. I guess it's a pelican. But there's some nice little sites, even though Drama certainly isn't high on the tourist circuit in Greece. But there are some very nice neighborhoods to walk around and some beautiful historic buildings. This is the 10th century church. It's a Byzantine church of Hagia Sophia. And another more modern church not too far away. Drama is another city that has a superb small museum. I like the small museums in Greece because they tend to focus on finds that are close to the area, rather than taking everything that was found in local archaeological sites and shipping them off to Athens. They keep them in small museums that are local. And I think that tells a better story. For one thing, it brings a little more tourism to local sites. And it also tells a better story about the findings because they are more closely related to the actual place you're standing in, the place where they were found. So there's some very interesting things in this museum, which you could spend maybe an hour would be enough to see the museum. Ancient coins and so forth. Another important building in Drama is this nicely restored 19th century mansion, which was the home of a wealthy tobacco merchant. And the warehouse building, which is on the left, the more rough stone building, was restored as well. And this now serves as a museum of photography in Drama and kind of focuses on the history of the city itself. There are a number of neoclassical mansions, this one from 1890, that dates from when the city is far more wealthy than it is today. I did have to stop at the public library, as I always do. Unfortunately, the public library is not one of the more beautiful buildings in Drama, but it was very good size, which was nice to see. The next city that we're going to stop in before we head off into the countryside, about an hour and a half to the east of Drama and Kavala, is the city of Xanthi, which has about maybe 70,000 people or so, and a very beautiful, atmospheric, historic, and kind of labyrinthine old town. It's situated right at the foot of the mountains, has a small river running through it, and is full of great architecture like this old mansion, which is the Daniel Hadzidakis house, which was built in the late 19th century by a man named Isaac Daniel, and later occupied by the Hadzidakis family, of whom there was a particularly well-known member who was a composer named Manos. So that both of those families were connected to this house, which is a good example of the kind of architecture that you'll see now. It's used as a cultural space for the city and has some beautifully restored interiors. These are some other examples of typical Ottoman-style houses, again, very common in all over northern Greece. You won't see this kind of architecture in the islands. If you look at guidebooks to Greece, travel guidebooks, they tend to usually show the blue-domed churches and the whitewashed houses that are typical of the islands, which are, of course, far more visited in Greece. But one of the things I love about Greece as a country is that, as small as it is, it has some very distinct regional identities, depending on what part of the country you're in. Even different islands have very different styles. So this very Ottoman style is something that you will see in central Greece and northern Greece, and the further you get up towards the Balkans, Bulgaria, and the further east that you go towards Turkey, the more that you will see this. As well as a number of neoclassical style mansions, most of which were built during the time period when Xanthi was, and still is to some extent, a much more wealthy center of tobacco processing and the trade that was associated with that. So it was quite a prosperous city. There are a number of restored buildings in Xanthi, but also a lot that are in need of fixing up. And I kind of like that because it means the old city isn't really an overly restored, it doesn't have that sort of gentrified, Disneyfied feel. It's a very real city where real people live. And in fact, one of the reasons I went there is because I have made a lot of friends in Greece, and some of them live in Xanthi, and we'll visit them, and you'll see some of them a little bit later in the program. So I've gotten to spend some really good personal time in Xanthi with local tour guides who were able to show me the city through the eyes of locals, which is always nice. Xanthi also has a substantial Muslim population. So you will see neighborhood mosques mixed in with Greek Orthodox churches. Here's one of each. For a while, there was a Jewish presence in the city as well, but under the Bulgarian occupation in World War II, the Jews were deported to camps in Poland, as well as a number of local Greeks and Muslims who were sent to Bulgaria for forced labor. The synagogue in the city, as far as I know, no longer exists, unfortunately. This is one of the most important monuments in the city, very imposing building. It's now used as the folk museum for Xanthi. And these are two adjoining mansions from the mid-19th century that were built by a wealthy tobacco merchant for his two sons. And it is now used as a museum that highlights the social and the religious and the economic life of the region, along with a lot of exhibits of furniture and decorative arts and costume, etc. It's very inexpensive, and if you stop in the local staff is very happy to walk you through the building and answer any of your questions. The mansions themselves retain a lot of their original elegant decorations, as you can see here with the elegant ceilings and frescoes, and they have set up the museum to show what life in this area would have been like in places like this, in a wealthy mansion of this type. This is the main hall that has the grand stairway. They've done some interesting restorations in this building, and actually in this photo you can see some different layers of paint that were done at different eras during the occupation of the building over its history that were uncovered during the restoration. And I took a picture of this map because I love maps just in general, but I found this old map interesting because of the time period when it was published, and it shows a little bit more clearly the gradual growth of the modern state of Greece from its independence from the Ottomans in the 1820s throughout the 19th century and the Balkan Wars and into the world wars of the 20th century. So you can see how it gradually over time increased in land area to include the current borders that it does today. I always have to stop for food, and Greece is a particularly good place to do that. My friends took me to this great little hole-in-the-wall souvlaki place over on the left, which did indeed have excellent souvlaki. Xanthi is also known for its delicious bougatsa, which is a sort of usually eaten for breakfast. It's a crispy phyllo pie. It can be either sweet or savory. You could, for example, have spinach or meat or cheese inside, but I think it's best known as a breakfast food with pastry cream inside, with powdered sugar and cinnamon on top, which is what you can see here. Fortunately, not far from heat, for those of you who are in the Boston area, there are a couple of Greek bakeries and import supermarkets where you can get good Greek food imported from Greece, and they even make in the local bakeries they make local bougatsa. You can buy it frozen, but it's even better to get it fresh from the bakery if you can, so you don't have to go to Greece. These are just a couple of scenes of street life in the neighborhood where my friends live. And I should point out that Xanthi, and in fact the whole region that we're visiting, is not very far from Bulgaria, barely 20 miles as the crow flies, although it's over the Rhodope Mountains, so it's not necessarily a quick trip. Again, walking around in Xanthi, talking about the tobacco industry. During the roughly 17th to the 19th century, the industry reached its peak and made Xanthi a very prosperous city. And there's still a number of the large old tobacco warehouses that dried, stored, and then processed the tobacco for sale. This is one of them here. And close up of the courtyard in between the big buildings. The industry kind of started to wane in the early 20th century, but tobacco is still grown in the area. Oops, there we go. And you can see by looking inland towards the north just how close the mountains are. The city is really nestled at the very base of and into the foothills of the mountains. In between that and the plains that go south towards the northern Aegean Sea. The bump that you can see in the background up here is a mountain called the Egg, appropriately for its shape. And a lot of the neighborhoods climb up from the old city into the hillsides through very narrow streets, which are delightful to visit on foot. The Coastlines River flows down from the mountains through the city and eventually ends up in the sea via a lake that we're going to see a little bit later. It has the look, obviously, of a very rocky mountain river. And although when I was there and took these photographs, you can see there's not a lot of water. it can definitely fill up during spring rains or storms, so it isn't always as dry as this. And there are some bridges that cross it. This one is a very pleasant pedestrian bridge near a park right in the center of the city. And you can get nice views all the way down through the river. There's a lot of vibrant street life in Xanthi. And this is kind of a focal point for the city. This is the main square where you can see the clock tower and the city hall over to the left. This square kind of forms a nexus between the new city, where a lot of more modern development and modern neighborhoods are, and the historic old city, which is a little further north as you head towards the hills. You can see the folklore museum that we were in just a few minutes ago, and right in front of it is a building from 1877, which is another mansion for a well-known family in the city that has elaborate faux painting on the exterior that makes it look like it's made from different kinds of marble. And in the 1970s, this particular house was given to the municipality and is now used for various cultural events, municipal events. And like the mansion I showed you earlier, it has some sumptuously decorated interiors and beautiful views out over the city. There's a nice terrace where sometimes there's a cafe, and you can look from the upper terrace all over the city and get some great views. This is looking, again, north towards the mountains, and you can see some of those older neighborhoods going up into the foothills. A few of the commercial buildings downtown. And there's even some fun, it's an artsy city. There's a lot of cultural things going on. So there are galleries. Here I am sitting in front of some murals. They have a huge spring carnival that they are also known for, which is kind of fun if you're there at that time of year. Some more of the neoclassical buildings. It is also a big university city. The Democritus University of Thrace, Thraki, is actually based in the town of Komotini to the east, but there is a big campus in Xanthi. It's a very big school. Overall, I think I read that it has somewhere in the vicinity of about 30,000 students. The campus is not an architectural gem, but it's clearly very busy. And I actually kind of liked a lot of the graffiti that you could see. It certainly contributes a lot to the life of the old city to have so many students around, so many young people. This graffiti I took note of because this was not long after the events here in the United States during the murder of George Floyd by the police, which was a big deal, not just in the US, but in countries all around the world. As in virtually any place you go in Greece, there are cats. And here are a few more of the traditional buildings in the old town, with the very typical Ottoman style architecture. One of the bigger churches, this is the church of Timios Prodromos, the most recent of several churches that were built on this particular site, since the earlier ones were destroyed either by fire at some point or by earthquakes at some other point. And the current building that you see here is from the 19th century. And then in the 1920s, they built this elegant bell tower just next to it. The big church in the center of the city is the Cathedral of St. Sophia. Obviously, as I've mentioned in my presentations on Greece before, Greece is overwhelmingly Greek Orthodox. But the further north and east you get towards the Turkish border, the more you will find minority populations of Muslims, and you will find mosques, and you will find people who speak various dialects, non-Greek dialects in that area as well. I did stop in at the public library, where, as I was not surprised to find, the librarians were very friendly, particularly to talk to another librarian. And they had this was the stairway that leads you up into the building. This is some just very poetic graffiti. I liked this. It means, in Greek, it means, I still love you. A tiny little Orthodox chapel wedged into a corner, and just a variety of other buildings throughout the city. This is the Musafir Bey mansion on the right, which was built in a largely Muslim neighborhood, another building that has since been turned over to the city. And there's even a little atmospheric Muslim cemetery with the very typical Turkish style tombstones. If you are willing to walk, or if you have a car, just outside of the city, maybe, I don't know, 20-minute, half-hour walk up the hills, are some monasteries. This is the closest one, the monastery of Panagia Archangeliotissa. It's a mouthful. It's a beautiful old building built after the major earthquake in 1829, which destroyed an earlier monastery on the site. And if you want to get a little bit out of the hustle and bustle of the city, it's a very pleasant walk up through some neighborhoods. And it has a gorgeous church with a lot of beautiful traditional Orthodox decoration. Although I found this one was kind of amusing, this very blasé image of Christ for religious painting. But it's a very impressive building, monumental monastery, and the view out over the city is just marvelous. Here you can see most of the old city nestled amphitheatrically under the hills. The further you go to the left in this photograph, the more you get out into the modern neighborhoods of the city. There's a great cafe life, lots of wonderful restaurants. And because Xanthi is in the middle of such a vast agricultural area, they have a huge market, which I was able to visit with my friend. This is Konstantinos on the left. We took a nice trip through the market. There is an actual physical, like many European towns, there's an actual market hall, which operates more or less continuously. This one was built in 1939 in that typical market hall style. It was bad timing, of course, since 1939 was right as World War II was breaking out, which meant that it closed almost immediately after opening. But in 1944, it reopened again. And it's a great place to see some of the local street life. I'm a huge fan of visiting markets anytime I travel, because they're such a good way of seeing the daily life of a place, and also just seeing the kinds of food and products that people buy. Obviously, there's a lot of fish here because it's so close to the sea. It's also a good way to learn the prices of things and learn the vocabulary for different local products, which may very well not be available in other parts of the world. Fish in particular, whenever you ask somebody what to translate a particular kind of fish, it's often difficult because they don't have that fish here in the United States. So there is no word for it. Vegetables, I'm biased. I think Greece has probably the best tomatoes in the world. Here's some of them here. And it's great to be in a place where you can get fresh vegetables and fruits so easily. This is the market that takes place on Saturday. So it's in addition to the building that has the market, they have a huge outdoor market as well. Greece is big on oranges, pomegranates, all manner of fruits and vegetables. And of course, my favorite, olives, which come in a huge number of varieties of different sizes and flavors, and with some with herb flavorings and some without. You can see the huge variety to choose from. I've often thought it would be fun to have an olive tasting instead of a wine tasting, just to compare how different they are. More fresh fish. Oh, this one, yes, I remember we noticed this. They had set up this particular fish display to have one that was actually smoking a cigarette at the time. There are garlic cellars. Garlic is obviously a staple in a lot of Greek cuisine. Leaving Xanthi to take a few side trips, Avdira is only about 30 minutes or so from the city, and was a very important coastal city in ancient times. It's on the coast, so if you head south out of Xanthi, very quickly you get to the coast where you can see beautiful beaches. And this site, which is certainly not one of the best known in Greece, is still fascinating. Well worth a visit. Again, it has a lovely little museum, and it has a good depiction of what the ancient city would have been like. You can walk around the ruins and see how it would have been laid out. There's some interesting finds in the museum. Here's Konstantinos demonstrating some of the burial chambers and urns. I noticed this also. I was recently in Corfu just a couple of weeks ago, and the museum there had smaller clay pots that were used specifically for burying children. These were for adults, which was an unusual way to bury people, but in some parts of the Mediterranean, it was done. Ancient Avdira is probably most famous for an individual you may have heard of called Democritus. He's from the 4th century BC, and he is known for being the first person to come up with atomic theory, the idea that you can keep cutting things into smaller and smaller bits until you get to something the size of an atom, which comes from the ancient Greek for something that can no longer be cut, something that is so small that it can't be cut into smaller pieces. Of course, nowadays, we have since learned that atoms do have a lot of much smaller bits to them. But it was still pretty impressive that we're talking about well over 2,500 years ago, the Greeks had already come up with this concept. The modern town of Avdira is kind of sleepy, but and very modest, but very pretty. Again, has some beautiful Ottoman-style houses with their typical usual balconies and upper stories that stick out, supported by beams. They also had these really nice, interesting chimneys, which have a very local style to that. I've noticed that as I traveled around different parts of Greece, that very often chimney pots have a very distinct local style, depending on the region or the island. It's just the local decoration. And of course, as I mentioned, very close to where we are, Greece is known for its beautiful beaches, but many of them, particularly in the islands to the south, they tend to be pebbly, whereas in the north, they have beaches that are a little bit more like what we're used to here in New England, where we have long, sandy beaches and very beautiful, warm, shallow water that's great for swimming. Here's another example of them. The water temperature in Greece is, as you might expect, much more conducive to swimming than it is here in New England. Even in the summer, we have pretty chilly water temperatures, but in Greece, particularly in the summer, it's like bath water, and you can swim well into November and even in the winter sometimes. So we went to the beach. Greek beaches are a little bit different from many of those that you'll find in the US, because they tend to be more organized with amenities like lounge chairs that you can pay for to rent for the day, umbrellas and cafes and bars and music. In fact, it's even caused problems in recent years in Greece because more and more private entities are taking over public beaches. So that's kind of caused some friction because beaches, according to the Greek constitution, the waterfront in Greece is public. So you actually are, no matter where you are in Greece, you have the right to access the ocean. But you can see here I am with my friends Konstantinos and his girlfriend, Lina. You don't have to pay for a lounge chair. You can bring your own, just like we might do here in America. But this is a very popular way for Greeks to go to the beach. If you're willing to rent one of these things, and then you can have servers bring you drinks and alcoholic drinks and cocktails and food and so forth, and you can listen to music. Or if you don't want any of that, you can walk a little bit further away and have the beach to yourself. This weird little building out in the middle of nowhere is called, and I'll mangle this because I don't speak Turkish, it's the Küçüklu Babateke, which is a building originally built for a brotherhood of Sufis. Obviously from the time when this was part of the Ottoman Empire. They think that this building is probably from the 15th or 16th centuries. And it's kind of odd because it's surrounded by nothing way out on the plains. And it's now used by both Muslims and Christians. Part of it is a mausoleum to the Küçüklu Baba, who was probably a dervish from what they know about him. And the smaller portion on the right is an Orthodox church to St. George. So it's kind of interesting to see these two faiths that have been squished together into this odd little building. And again, we're in the much more flat plain area that goes out to the sea. We're looking at the northern Aegean Sea here. This whole area is a very flat marshland extending to the sea. This particular spot is called Lake Vistonida, and it's now a protected area, particularly for the marshes and the migrating birds that frequent the area as they're on their way to or from Africa and Europe and back and forth. So you'll see a lot of bird life there, particularly depending on the time of year. This, I think, was a curlew of some kind. There's also a monastery that you can visit, the pretty little monastery of St. Nicholas, which is reached by a little wooden pedestrian bridge. So it floats on this island in the middle of the lagoon, completely surrounded by salt marshes and bird life. Built sometime before the 19th century. I wasn't able to determine exactly when. And seabirds everywhere. Looking back inland, here's a flotilla of coots scooting across the water, a kind of ocean-going duck that's black with a white bill. And a number of cormorants, which are common here in the United States as well. I liked how these were all each had their own individual piling to sit on. And a bird that you're not likely to see too often, but particularly on the beach. This is a hoopoe, which is found all over the Mediterranean. And I see them a lot at our Greek house, which is way down in the south of the Peloponnese, but I had never seen one on the beach before. They're an amazing bird, particularly in flight, because they're an interesting combination of bright orange and black and white, and they have this crest as well. Perhaps surprisingly, there are a number of natural hot springs that you can visit nearby where I went with my friend, and also not far from this little area where the lake is a reconstruction of a Sarakatsani village, which they were a nomadic tribe of shepherds who moved from the mountains to the grazing areas on the plains, depending on the time of year, with their livestock. And this is a recreation. These are not original, but I wouldn't even call this a museum. It was just a little reconstruction by the side of the road, but it's to give you an idea of what their traditional thatched domed huts would have been like. Moving further east, working our way through the major population centers of the area. This is Komotini, which a little smaller than Xanthi. It's not the most amazing city in Thrace, but it's definitely worth a detour, particularly for its pleasant little old town. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, it happens to be the administrative capital of the region of Eastern Macedonia and Thrace. It's also very noteworthy for its large Muslim minority. In fact, more than half the population of this particular town is Muslim, the highest actually of any city in the entire European Union, which is hardly surprising given how close it is to Turkey. It's only, I don't know, maybe 50 miles or so from the Turkish border. But there's a number of other ethnicities in this region as well, including Pontic Greeks, which come from the Black Sea coast, the northern coast of Turkey, which borders the Black Sea. And also there are refugees from the descendants of the Armenian genocides from just over a century ago. There are also a group called Pomaks who speak a dialect of Bulgarian. There are Roma in this area and others. So as you walk around in Komotini, you'll hear a variety of different languages when you stroll around the old city where the market is. You definitely get the feel here in Komotini that this is a city that people live rather than visit as tourists, which is kind of nice. There were a few tourists, but relatively few, and it really was a nice feeling of daily life in a provincial city in Greece. And there are a number of lovely mosques that you'll see walking around. As well as this building. This is an Imaret, another one like the one that we saw in Kavala. It's one of the oldest Ottoman buildings anywhere in Europe. Unfortunately, when I was there, it was under restoration, which is good in the long run, but it meant I wasn't able to visit inside. And it dates back to the 14th century. On the way back, heading back towards Xanthi along the southern border of the mountains, I stopped at the bridge of Polyanthos, which is very close by to Komotini and worth a stop. It's an Ottoman era bridge that crosses the Kompsatos River, very close to where it emerges from the mountains. And you'll find a lot of this type of bridge in different parts of Greece, particularly in the north. Aside from the bridge itself, which is very beautiful, the surrounding area is very nice for walking. But it's fun to cross the bridge, which is about 40 feet high, kind of narrow. Here, this is a better view that these were the only other people there when I was there, just a couple, to give it some scale. The whole bridge is about 60 feet long, 40 feet high, but it's very typical of this old style of dating way back to Byzantine times. I haven't seen too many of these bridges in southern Greece, but they are very common in northern Greece. And we're going to also, since we're at the edge of the mountains, we're going to spend some time in the Rhodope Mountains, which form the northern border of this region. And although most of the range lies in Bulgaria, there's still quite a bit in Greece, and the border runs through them. It's a wonderful place to explore away from the cities, to get out into nature, particularly if you're there in the summer when the heat down on the plains can get kind of oppressive if you're in the city. And I spent a lot of time in this tiny little village called Kareofito, which is where my friends have a house that's only about 5 miles from the border with Bulgaria, just behind this ridge of mountains behind it. This is not actually the village. This is a larger one nearby called Stavroupoli, which has a very typical square of an average village in Greece. The square is the center of village life that tends to have a cafe, often has an enormous platano, a plane tree, which you'll find common in much of Europe. And again, as you might expect, more of the typical architecture of the area, and wonderful tavernas. Here's some more local food if you're getting hungry. Some salads that have cabbage, tzatziki, and cheese dip. I'm a huge fan of beet salad. Not everyone likes beets, but I think you should get to know them better. And there's pansaro salata in Greece is one of those kinds of recipes where there's a million different ways to make it. depending on your tastes or your grandmother, depending on what recipe she used. The one I make includes yogurt and walnuts, a little vinegar. So you'll find a lot of different varieties, but they're all delicious and very good for you. Here's a stew with noodles, delicious French fries. Greece makes really good fried potatoes, often because they have sea salt and oregano on them, which gives them a little unique flavor. Here's some crusty bread and a sort of Greek frittata made with vegetables, sometimes with potato. So here's the village. Karyofito is actually divided into two villages, an upper and a lower. My friend's house is in the lower part, which is smaller, the smaller of the two. And here's their house, neighborhood dogs, and an airy terrace that looks out over the landscape. It's a very forested area. For those of you who are living in New England, in the Boston area, it's kind of like having a vacation place up in New Hampshire or down on the Cape. It's only about an hour from downtown Xanthi, and yet very soon you're up in the mountains where it's considerably cooler. And it's a nice, modest home with a fireplace where you can get away from the city and away from the heat. It's a very rural, woodsy, mountainous area, which you can see from the livestock and the piles of firewood that are laid in for the winter. And the views are just gorgeous. This is looking south from the village toward the sea, which is not actually that far away. It's only about 20, 25 miles away. But because it's over the mountains, it feels like a completely different world. The highest of the mountains in this area are about 5,000 feet or so. Although into Bulgaria, there are some that are even higher. But it's amazing how such a short distance brings you to a completely different kind of place. We were lucky to get, I was there again just this summer, and it has been very dry in the Mediterranean, and much of Greece suffered from drought through most of 2024. But we were lucky to get an afternoon thunder shower. It's only maybe an hour, hour and a half, but every little bit of rain helps. And in addition to getting the rainfall, after the storm had passed, the entire valley was had this beautiful glow with the mist rising up from the humidity of the rain. And the fact that it happened at twilight was just beautiful, just a magical scene looking out over the mountains. More food. That evening, my friends grilled on the patio, fresh fish, fresh vegetables on the grill. Here's some various kinds of grilled meat in burger form, in steaks, more fried potatoes, dips that have cheese and garlic, crusty bread. So here I am with my friends, Konstantinos and Lina, Konstantinos and me. And as I mentioned, it's been a great privilege for me to make so many good friends in Greece, not just because of the friendships, but also because it's a way of learning more about a culture from the people who are part of it. It's a very different experience from traveling as a tourist. This tiny little village is another one that has yet another interesting old bridge, historic bridge over the stream that runs through the village. And even some remnants on this little building next to it that indicate the time when this was Ottoman territory. See some Arabic writing there. It is a very rural area. Here's a friend of theirs who has a farm, so there's livestock of all different kinds. I'm partial to goats. If you've been to my programs before, you know how much I love goats. This is the larger part of the village called Upper Karyofito. And the monument that you can see here commemorates the dead during the Bulgarian occupation in World War II, when Bulgaria was allied with the Axis forces. So a number of Greeks died in even tiny villages like this in the mountains. That same glorious mist sometimes comes in the morning, which you can see here, with awe-inspiring views across the valley. And there's a surprising amount to see in this area, too. If you want a little bit more culture, there's a little village called Paranesti, which is not too far away, that has a natural history museum, which displays the wildlife of the area, the geological history of the area. Here's some wild boar, for example. Wild mountain goats that still can be seen in the area. You're not likely to run into a lot of these animals, the larger wildlife, just because they tend to be shy of people and are more likely to be up in the mountains away from people. But small mammals you probably will see. And of course, everywhere you're going to see cats. One of the major landforms in this area is the river. Greece has relatively few rivers, particularly compared to other countries in Europe, and none of them are terribly major. But the Nestos River, which runs through this whole area that we've been visiting, is one of the prettier ones. It's only 140 miles long, and a good part of that is actually in Bulgaria. But it's a beautiful river and has a lot of activity around it. It eventually flows out into the northern Aegean through the marshy delta area where we were earlier. And you can go boating on it, you can hike near it. It's an ideal place for mild adventures. We actually did some rafting, which I guess on a scale, if you've done any kind of whitewater rafting before, this is very mild. It's a good introductory thing to do. It was apparently rated level 2, which is a bit of fun, but without being stressful if you don't like whitewater rafting. You may notice in this picture and the other one after it, there's a little logo in the bottom, and I have to make a plug for my friends. The reason I got to know all these people is because I do Greek lessons with an outfit called glossonauts.com. Glossonaut is a word that's an invented word related to astronaut or cosmonaut, or and glossa is the Greek word for language. And the idea is you're taking an adventure. Learning a language is a voyage, and they are terrific at helping you learn Greek. They have some terrific content on Facebook, on Instagram, and on YouTube. So if you are at all interested in learning any Greek, or improving whatever Greek you have, I would encourage you to visit them either through social media or through their website and get to see some of the terrific content that they have. It's also a great way to make friends in the Greek community, learn not just the teachers, but the other students as well. Here's another view of the Nestos, which is a very broad and beautiful river. Much of it is fairly tame, but there's a few areas where it moves along a little bit more rapidly. And after a couple of hours vigorously rafting down the river, you have to eat. So we all went out to a restaurant where you can fill up on grilled meats of all different kinds: sausages, souvlaki, Greek burgers with melted cheese between them. Here is another lovely view of the mountains with a village nestled off in the distance. I think that's Stavroupoli, where we stopped for lunch earlier. And actually, this is Stavroupoli again, one of the larger towns in the area. It's got this quaint old railroad station that serves as a reminder that the area used to have train service. Unfortunately, it doesn't anymore. Maybe someday it will have it again. But we stopped here just to see the old building. I love the beautiful primary colors. We also visited very close to Kariofito. We visited some of Lina's relatives in a nearby village. It's impossible to leave there without a trunkload of fresh vegetables given to you by the very friendly people who live there. This is the house where we stopped to visit. We're in the middle of nowhere, but I still found the place just Instagram worthy. There are so many beautiful images to see in rural Greece. And for a village that only had a handful of houses, it had an incredibly elaborate Orthodox church, which you can see on the right, and a friendly local who was cooking in his outdoor kitchen. But the food never stops. So when we got back home, we had a light snack. Here we are with Konstantinos and his mother, and Lina. I was also fortunate enough this summer to be there during a festival. Most places in Greece, large or small, are affiliated with some sort of patron saint. And depending on what time of year that patron saint's day is, that's when there will probably be a festival, the big festival of the year. So it could be at any time of year. This particular one happened to be in the summer. I believe it was early August. And so even though this village is pretty small, a good couple hundred people met in this place that is set up for food and dancing and music and company. Local bands playing traditional Greek music. And for dessert, loukoumades, which are eaten all over the Middle East under various different names. Loukoumades is the Greek word. They're fried balls of dough, kind of like a little bit akin to donut holes here in America, but better as far as I'm concerned. They're deep fried, and then you can eat them with all sorts of different things. The traditional way is simply served with a honey syrup that you can see on the right, but you can also get them with chocolate and other kinds of sweet, gooey things to dip them in. Because the area is so isolated, you are likely to get very good night sky viewing with a great view of the Milky Way. If the sky is clear, you're very likely to be able to see that up in the mountains. And there's a lot to explore in the area. Besides nature, there's some history as well. This is called the Fortress of Kalivas, which is only about, not even a half an hour from the village that we were staying in. Excuse me. It's perched on an outcrop a few miles west of the village, way up high on the mountains, and it makes a nice outing if you're interested in a view. It was built by Philip II of Macedonia back in his day, which was roughly the 4th century BC. And it's pretty well preserved for something from that time period. There's a number of foundation walls still there, and some very good explanatory panels that explain how it was used, when it was built, and what it originally would have looked like. But it's worth visiting, if for nothing else, just for the fabulous views out over the valley. It was specifically built there so that it was within sight of other fortresses along the valley, along the Nestos River. That was kind of the point. They could communicate from one place to another, from one fortress to another. After its original time period, it was used by the Romans, and then later by the Byzantines as well. I was the only person there, and it's probably not terribly unlikely that you will be the only person there. As you explore the mountains, this is a rural area, so you're likely to run into a lot of livestock in the road. For me, that's always the test of a good vacation, is whether you ran into livestock in the road. Konstantinos and I got held up for at least 15 minutes by what has got to be one of the largest goat herds of goats that I've ever seen. And again, back to the Nestos River, but much closer to Xanthi. This is a little bit further west, right where the mountains open up onto the plains, not too far west of where Xanthi, the city, is. This is an area where, again, you can do a lot of boating. There's a activity center where you can set up canoeing and hiking and kayaking, rafting, and so forth. But it's also the start of a terrific hike. There's a trail along the most mountainous part of the river near Xanthi. Some of it is even paved, which makes it a very easy trek if you're not really into hiking, but you want to see some dramatic scenery. And it is dramatic here. It's just stunningly beautiful at a point where the river meanders in between the mountains. And you're right under the cliffs, looking out over just some gorgeous river and mountain scenery. It snakes through this very narrow gorge. And as you can see on the left, significant parts of it are actually paved. So you don't have to be, even if you have mobility issues or aren't really into hiking, you can very easily get to some beautiful scenery and then just turn around and go back. You only have to go as far as you feel comfortable. The trail does continue for many kilometers if you're willing to do that, but you certainly don't have to. Here we are at a particularly picturesque point in the trip. And you can see another spot where, like we saw earlier, there used to be a train line that ran all the way along here. Unfortunately, not anymore, but you can still walk along the train lines and see some of the tunnels that go through the gorge in this particular stretch. This is certainly not a landscape that many people would associate with Greece. It's very green, very lush. We're about as far north in Greece as you can get before you end up in Bulgaria. So it's a very different atmosphere from what you would see down in the very dry islands of the southern Aegean. If you follow the Nestos far enough, this is quite a ways up the river, almost as far as the Bulgarian border. There is a dam that creates a charming lake, and it's even more forested and less visited up here, if you're willing to go up that far. Another thing to do in this area, if you have a chance, is to drive or hike if you want, but you can drive all the way up to the top of the mountains above the little area where we were just walking. It's a good 2,500 feet up, but there's a phenomenal view of the gorge below, particularly if you're lucky enough to have good weather. The first time I went up, we didn't have terribly good weather, although I did get to see, I don't love heights, so this is not an activity I would be likely to do, but if you like parasailing, that's an incredible place to do it. All around there are mountains of very similar height and views in all directions. But the highlight, if the weather is clear, is to get this stupendous view down to the river below, which is where we were just walking. You can see this whole valley where all the meanders snake through this gorge in between the mountains. And I'll end just by thanking my friends. Konstantinos, his mother Anna, here I am. This is in that small town where we had some drinks. And here's Konstantinos with his father. I'm planning my next trip back. Obviously, I try to go to Greece at least a couple times a year, but it's through friends like this that I have been able to learn so much more about Greece, to learn so much about the actual daily life in Greece, which makes travel so much more enjoyable and worthwhile. I'm going to tease you a little bit with a program that I may do in the future. I haven't put it together yet. I mentioned at the very beginning when I was showing you the map, there are two islands that are part of this part of Greece. One is called Thassos, which is very close to the mainland. It's barely a half-hour ferry ride right off the coast. And also Samothraki, which is a little bit further to the east. Thassos is not far from Kavala. And I spent a few days there this summer, fortunately, during much better weather. This is looking at it from the mountains in Thraki, looking back across the plain to the island just off the coast. It's very mountainous, very green and very lush. It has fabulous beaches, some very beautiful villages, some excellent mountain hikes, and some very interesting archaeological sites as well. So it's well worth a visit. And hopefully at some point I will put together a program and maybe show you that. Um, this is the ferry port when you arrive. And you will probably be accompanied by seabirds both directions as you head there. So I'm going to end the program here. And I'll stop sharing my screen and let's take a look at some of the questions. Okay, let's see what we've got. Someone mentions they were unaware of the tobacco industry. How long has this been going on? The tobacco industry goes back at least a good 2, 3, 4 centuries. Although, like in a lot of places, it's not as strong as it was before. Tobacco use is declining, believe it or not, even in Greece. But it still exists. I am certainly not an expert on it, so I'd have to look into it a little bit more. I do know from what I learned that it kind of started to decline in the early 20th century. The high point of the industry was definitely like the 18th and 19th centuries, but it hasn't completely disappeared. Please repeat the name of the breakfast item. Oh, that was called bugatsa. I put that in the chat. Whoops, not if I spell it wrong. Bugatsa. That's the spelling in the Roman alphabet. As I mentioned, you can buy it here, depending on where you are located and whether there's any Greek import stores or Greek bakeries near you. You may be able to get it in some local supermarkets. Let's see. Why are so many buildings turned over to the city? I don't really know, but I don't think it's unique to Greece. I certainly don't think it's unique to Xanthi. A lot of places throughout the world, elaborate buildings like that, particularly old mansions, they're very expensive to keep up. They are expensive to restore and maintain. So often the owners can't keep up with that. So they try to sell it to someone who can take care of it. Even here in the United States, a lot of old buildings have taken on new life as municipal structures that are used for cultural events and so forth. In England, the grand old estates are often turned over to the National Trust, or so I don't think that's certainly not unique to Greece. It's just a way of making sure that the buildings find an owner who is in a position to maintain the building and keep a historic building up. There are no railings on the bridge. That particular one, no. I've seen a number of historic stone bridges in Greece that do have railings, and some don't. I think it's just the way they were built. It's certainly not necessary. It's wide enough that you could easily walk across, or if you were on horseback or donkey, you could get across without having a railing. Do I have a presentation on Cyprus? Oh, I'd love to, but I haven't been to Cyprus yet. I absolutely will be doing a presentation on Cyprus if I ever go there, which I hope to at some point. When is the traveling librarian doing a presentation about Halkidiki? Okay, this is my teacher, Yorgos. He's trying to be a smartass on Zoom. I visited Yorgos. Yorgos is a great teacher, and I have been to visit him in Halkidiki, which is a terrific area just to the east of Thessaloniki, which has some beautiful beaches, a lot of historic sites. And yes, Yorgos, I promise at some point I will do a presentation about it, and you'll be the star. Have I ever encountered Ladino speakers in the area? Not personally. That's something I'd have to look into. I don't really know whether there are any speakers there, but I can try to look into that. And as always, Robert will send a follow-up email after the program, probably tomorrow. So I'll see if I can find out an answer to that and let him know. Who runs tours to Thrace? That's another thing off the top of my head I don't know. But you could certainly, if you did some Googling, I'm sure there are places that do it. Thrace is not one of the most visited parts of Greece. So I think a lot of the big tour companies may not do it, but I bet you could find a lot of smaller ones that would probably actually be better because they might do more customizable tours. Would a solo traveler or non-Greek speaker be able or safe to travel in Syria? Absolutely. I don't see any problem. Greece is a very safe place to travel, provided you take, in big cities, provided you take the normal kind of simple protections to avoid flashing wealth all over the place and keeping an eye on your belongings when you're in a crowd. Greece is a very safe place to travel. I think the biggest problem with traveling in this part of Greece is you would, unless you are on a tour, there's not a lot of public transportation that would make it easy for a traveler. So you would probably want a car. I actually find driving in Greece perfectly easy and nice. Rental cars are relatively inexpensive, I've found in Greece. And if you can drive in Boston, you can drive in Greece. So it kind of depends on your own level of comfort. If you've rented cars in other parts of Europe, I don't think you'd have a trouble in Greece, but that's something you'd have to judge for yourself. What languages are spoken? Obviously Greek, and I think it's worth it for you to learn, and this is advice I give anyone traveling anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter what country you're going to. You can learn a few basic phrases like hello, goodbye, where's the bathroom, where's the bar, your village is beautiful, good morning, good afternoon, please, thank you, all those kinds of things. It's very easy to learn some basic, simple phrases. My experience in Greece has been that if you know even a couple of words in Greek, they will fall all over themselves because it impresses them that you took the time to do that. And that's true in most countries, I think. Having said that, if you don't speak any Greek, most of the places that we visited today, with a couple, like, unless you're really up in the small villages, most people, particularly anybody under the age of, say, 50, is going to speak at least a little bit of English, enough that you can deal with a restaurant or a hotel. And in any of the bigger towns, I don't think you would have a problem speaking English. It's a widely spoken second language for Greeks because many tourists from different foreign countries, English is the common language that they speak, particularly in the tourist industry. Older widowed ladies still dress in black. Yes, they do. I've certainly seen that. That may be a tradition that's not as strong as it would have been in decades past, but I've certainly seen it. Maybe less so in the cities, but even in Athens and Thessaloniki, I've seen it. So certainly in smaller villages and traditional areas, it's not at all uncommon. Where would I fly to from Boston? How do you get from Athens to Thrace? Traveling there, the two big places to go are either Athens or Thessaloniki. There are no direct flights to Thessaloniki from the US. You would probably have to go through some other country, like probably Paris or Frankfurt, Munich, also Toronto and Montreal, because there's a sizable Greek population in Canada, so Air Canada often does that. Um, the only direct flight that I know of from New England, at least, to Greece is Delta flies direct from Boston to Athens, which is very convenient. And then from getting to the north of Greece, if you were already in Athens, by far the easiest way is to fly. You can drive, but it's a long drive. And you can get a flight from Athens to Thessaloniki, which is probably not even an hour, for 100, 150 US dollars. Another place to fly into is Kavala. There is an airport in Kavala, which is an hour and a half, 2 hours east of Thessaloniki. So if you were planning to visit Thrace and not Thessaloniki, you could get there more quickly, but it's a smaller airport, so there aren't quite as many flights. Could you buy any of their fish in Boston? Probably not, because Boston has more than enough fish of its own that it's not likely to import fish from Greece. How did the two people get on the bridge that I showed? My photograph may not have shown it, but you can, on either side of the bridge, you can climb up onto it. It was actually easy to do that. Let's see, I'm looking through. That was the Q&A. Now I'm taking a quick look through the chat just to see if there's anything there that I missed. Oh, somebody mentioned Corfu. Yes, I am just in the process of working on, because I literally just got back from Corfu last Tuesday. So I am putting together a program on Corfu, which I think is a very popular destination in Greece. So I don't know if I haven't scheduled that yet with any particular library, but I think it's very likely that Robert and I will arrange that at some point soon. Let's see. Da, da, da. Oh, Konstantinos is in on it and on the Zoom, and he is mentioning that the most aromatic tobacco in the world still exists here, and it's called basma. So thank you for that. Robert says, yes, I'll send out an email tomorrow. And I guess that covers all the questions. But as always, Robert will send out his follow-up tomorrow. I think the only question that I didn't have a good answer to was the language question, and I will look that up and see if I can find an answer to send out tomorrow. And also, Robert will also send out my email, which by all means, if there were any other questions that you have, feel free to email me personally with any questions about this program or anything else. I'm happy to answer them if I can. So as I said, I don't think I have, Robert, we don't have another question, another program scheduled.
We need to get working on that, Jeff. I'll be in touch, but certainly we'll do something in December or January. Folks, we're off next Tuesday for the election day. I'll be hiding under my covers for a week, I think. But we're back on the 12th, Tuesday the 12th, for armchair travel to the Galapagos Islands. On the 19th, we'll be in Antarctica. On the 26th, we'll be in Australia. And I will circle back to Jeff come December, and I will be in touch, Jeff. So okay. Folks, let's give Jeff a big virtual round of applause for a great presentation. Look for an email from me tomorrow with a link to the recording as well as information about some other upcoming programs. And I'll include the answer that Jeff provides to me. And folks, when you exit the Zoom in a few moments, just make sure to take the 7-question feedback survey. That is greatly appreciated. Any last words, Jeff?
Nope, just as always, thank you for joining me. Ευχαριστώ πολύ. I hope you enjoy Greece as much as I do. I also, again, I want to thank the friends, some of whom are actually in on the Zoom today, for welcoming me into their families and friends and their homes in Greece, because it's become my second country. And so that's very nice for me, and I love being able to share it with everyone here. So I hope to see you all at whatever the next program is I do for you guys.
Yes, stay tuned. Thanks so much, Jeff. Great job as always. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks.